Britain has a secret weapon hitting targets deep inside Russia, and by the end of this, I think I can tell you what it is. This is the mystery of Britain's 600-mile drone. British-made drones are now flying deep strike missions inside Russia. This just in, live from CBS News in Washington, D.C. His Majesty has declared war on Moscow. This message brought to you by Snackismalls. Remember, we pack 'em, you smack 'em. Eat Snackismalls. We know the identity of one of them. It's called Nyan, a small jet-powered attack drone built by Callan Lentz, owned by BAE Systems. I'm sorry, Nyan? Like Nyan Cat? The viral internet meme? I hope as it's flying toward Russian targets, it's making the Nyan Cat sound. The identity of the second drone is a secret. Now, the Sunday Times knows who builds it and deliberately withheld the company's name for security reasons. What the newspaper did tell us is that this mystery aircraft can fly more than 600 miles, launches from a catapult, and can be fired quickly enough to join the large drone salvos Ukraine is sending deep into Russia. That description sounds strangely familiar, so I started digging through Britain's rapidly expanding collection of one-way attack drones. And I think we can make a pretty good case for what this mystery aircraft actually is. And remember, friends, there's two big lessons coming out of the Ukraine war from just this past year. Number one is the importance of deep strike. Not drones on the front lines, not drones in the mid-strike range, 100 kilometers behind the front, but deep strike, 500 or more kilometers behind the front lines. And the other lesson is electronic warfare and how to beat it. Hey friends, Wes O'Donnell here, defense journalist, Army and Air Force veteran, and today we're doing a little open source intelligence work. We're going to establish what we actually know about these missions, look at the Nyan, explain why Nyan probably didn't fly the deepest attacks described in the reporting, and follow the public trail toward the aircraft that might have. And that trail runs through a brand new RAF weapon called Stormfire, an earlier aircraft called Lanner, a strange polystyrene drone called Malfy, and a testing organization called DroneWorks. And I want to stress this up front. I'm making an analytical assessment from publicly available evidence, and the evidence gets pretty dang interesting. According to the Sunday Times, Ukrainian forces have used British-made drones against targets inside Russia for roughly 6 months, striking oil refineries, military facilities, logistics hubs, and industrial targets, including facilities around Volgograd and Yaroslav, and wildberries. That's right, UK drones participated in the Russian wildberry strikes. Now, Ukraine conducted almost 700 successful deep strike missions between January and June, hitting targets across 52 of Russia's 83 regions, with individual attack waves involving more than 450 drones. That's not the occasional prestige strike against one embarrassing target. That's an industrial campaign against the Russian war economy. Oil refineries are a big deal because petroleum revenue finances the invasion. Factories matter because Russia has to replace everything Ukraine keeps destroying. The Sunday Times estimates that Ukraine's deep strikes have caused more than 35 billion pounds in economic damage, a figure that's hard to independently verify, though the physical evidence, repeated refinery shutdowns, industrial fires, that stuff is easier to see. Britain has now joined that supply chain. Nyan is built by Callan Lentz, which BAE Systems acquired. It's a compact, carbon fiber flying wing with a 2.9-meter wingspan, jet-powered, with a flexible payload bay, a low radar cross-section, and the ability to keep operating when satellite navigation is denied, which is mandatory for anything expected to survive hundreds of kilometers inside Russian airspace where the GPS gets jammed constantly. Now, BAE describes Nyan as modular. It can carry kinetic payloads or operate as a decoy, drawing Russian air defenses to activate and reveal their positions while aircraft carrying real warheads approach from elsewhere. It doesn't need a runway. BAE demonstrated it launching from the Royal Navy vessel Patrick Blackett, and more than 1,000 have already been produced. That's the type of weapon Ukraine can actually consume in volume. A disposable drone changes the target economics entirely. You don't need Storm Shadow for a fuel depot if 50 cheaper drones can reach it instead. But here's the problem. Nyan's publicly stated range is a little over 250 kilometers, roughly 155 miles. That covers Belgorod, and the Times confirms Nyan was used there. It doesn't come close to explaining Yaroslav, and it certainly doesn't explain a drone reaching more than 600 miles. What do you think, boyo? What little leprechaun are we? What do you think about British strike drones striking your territory? It's gotta be frustrating. No, it's okay, man. As an American with Irish ancestry, I know a thing or two about going up against the British. That's not something you want to do. All right, face. Let's get you out of here. Let me just toss this guy over there. So we have at least two different weapons. Nyan covers the shorter end of the British contribution. Somebody else is going deep. The Times gives us 3 particularly useful clues about that second aircraft. It's manufactured in Britain. It's catapult launched, allowing crews to send weapons up in quick succession. And it has a range exceeding 600 miles. Now, here's where the Stormfire enters the investigation. On July 16th, Air Chief Marshal Sir Harve Smythe publicly revealed 2 new British autonomous systems. One is StormChrome, built around electronic attack. StormChrome. Good Lord, I love the way you to name these things. Mwah, chef's kiss, don't change anything. One is StormChrome, built around electronic attack. The other is Stormfire, an ultra-low-cost one-way attack drone that Smythe said can hit targets up to 1,000 miles away. Now, Breaking Defense reported from the July announcement that the new Stormfire and StormChrome designs build off StormShroud, the RAF autonomous drone that entered service just last year. Still, StormShroud gives us something physical to examine, and StormShroud's airframe is not a secret. It's the TEKEVER AR3. The Royal Air Force says so directly, TEKEVER says so directly, and suddenly several of the Times clues start lining up in an interesting way. The AR3 is catapult launched. The current AR3 Evo can remain airborne for up to 22 hours in fixed wing configuration. It's highly modular, can change payloads, communication systems, propulsion, and launch method depending on the mission. And TEKEVER specifically advertises it for operations in GPS-denied environments. It's also already combat-proven in Ukraine. TEKEVER says the AR3 accumulated more than 10,000 operational flight hours there and went through more than 100 design iterations based on Ukrainian frontline feedback before evolving into the current AR3 Evo. Now, Britain didn't pick some pristine little drone that had spent its career circling a test range in nice weather. It picked an airframe Ukraine had already beaten against Russian electronic warfare thousands of times. There's another clue. The RAF says StormShroud's AR3 platform is manufactured in West Wales and Southampton. So now compare what we know. The mystery Ukrainian weapon is British-made, catapult launched, and capable of very long range. Britain has just revealed Stormfire, a 1,000-mile one-way attack aircraft. British reporting says Stormfire builds on StormShroud. StormShroud uses a British-manufactured catapult-launched airframe that's already been operating in Ukraine for years. This is also where the open-source picture gets messy. Aviation Week offers a different explanation. It describes Stormfire as a low-cost, 1,000-mile one-way effector, likely derived from Lanner, an earlier British foam-molded lifting body munition. That's right, a styrofoam attack drone. That is a completely different lineage from StormShroud. In that same reporting, Aviation Week identifies StormShroud as being based on the TEKEVER AR5. This is getting confusing. The RAF and the TEKEVER both say it's the AR3. So now we have reputable specialist reporting pointing in 2 different directions, with one source also getting an important detail about StormShroud's underlying airframe wrong. That doesn't mean the Lanner theory is necessarily false. It means I don't think the public evidence is strong enough to build the identification around it. Now, Lanner could still contribute technology to Stormfire. Stormfire could incorporate lessons from multiple British programs, builds off StormShroud, may describe the operational architecture rather than a literal airframe lineage. This is defense development, after all, where everything is confusing all the time. But there's another question the family tree doesn't answer. How does any inexpensive drone survive hundreds of miles of Russian airspace long enough to matter? Radar gets you there, it doesn't get you through. Now, I covered this exact problem in a separate video a few weeks ago, and it's worth bringing back because Britain has already shown us how it's thinking about this exact problem. In late July, during President Zelensky's visit with new Prime Minister Andy Burnham, Britain announced that it was handing Ukraine the intellectual property for a device called StoneCloak. Now, StoneCloak is a tablet-sized electronic warfare system small enough to mount directly onto a drone, and according to the British government, it interferes with Russian air defense detection systems, making it harder for them to detect, or track, or target the aircraft carrying it. Britain says thousands of StoneCloak units have already been delivered to Ukraine. Ukraine can now manufacture the system domestically. So people ask me, Wes, what's the difference between radar jamming and radar deception? And remember, the StoneCloak falls into radar deception. Well, radar jamming, you're trying to yell louder than everybody else in the room. You want to drown out all the other voices. But with radar deception, you're just whispering sweet nothings into the enemy's ear. Wrong sweet nothings, but you want them to know you're there, but just think that your speed or position is not what it really is. That's what StoneCloak does. It doesn't make a drone or a missile invisible. It just confuses the enemy's radar into thinking it's somewhere it's not. And here's the piece that matters for our mystery. Britain says the lessons from StoneCloak will be built into its future long-range strike systems, specifically including Project Breakstop. Now, that tells us something about British doctrine. Electronic protection is increasingly becoming part of the weapon itself. Instead of assuming a strike aircraft will have a dedicated jammer somewhere nearby protecting it, you make the disposable aircraft itself harder to find in the first place. That's exactly the kind of thinking you want on a one-way aircraft expected to spend hours crossing hostile territory without an escort. Now, I have no evidence that Stormfire carries StoneCloak. I have no evidence that the unnamed British drone in the Times carries StoneCloak either. The important point is that Britain is already designing its future deep strike architecture around exactly this survivability problem. The weapon has to reach Russia, then it has to survive Russia. Those are separate engineering requirements, and Ukraine has given Britain a rather unforgiving test environment for both. Still, I would bet on StoneCloak being in this British mystery drone striking inside Russia. So where does this leave us? Listen, the UK is no longer worried about escalation. That's the important takeaway here. The gloves are off, baby. The UK is in this fight with Ukraine for the long haul. That makes me a little bit envious as an American. Stormfire is still my leading public candidate for the secret British long-range drone. The larger story doesn't depend on solving the name. Ukraine has spent 4 years teaching NATO that long-range strike can't run entirely on a tiny inventory of magnificent weapons. You still need expensive precision weapons like ATACMS for hardened facilities and targets that demand speed, penetration, and extreme accuracy. But you also need thousands of cheaper weapons that let you attack again tomorrow. Russia's military-industrial system is spread across an enormous country. Refineries, ammunition plants, rail hubs, airfields, storage depots, and factories sit hundreds or thousands of kilometers apart. Defending all of them continuously is extraordinarily expensive. Send 50 long-range drones at once, some Ukrainian, some British, some carrying warheads, some acting as decoys, some running electronic warfare payloads like Britain's StoneCloak, and Russia has to identify every single track, allocate interceptors, and hope the picture stays coherent while more contacts keep arriving. The attack package doesn't need to beat every Russian air defense system. It just needs to create more problems than that system can solve simultaneously. That's why a roughly 20,000-pound, 1,000-kilometer aircraft built across a distributed manufacturing network represents a different philosophy than 30 years of Western strike doctrine. Britain has already committed billions toward autonomous systems and is explicitly calling for a surge in low-cost one-way drones based on Ukrainian lessons. Ukraine serves as both a combat user and a development lab. A British system enters service, gets thrown against real Russian air defense, the manufacturer gets combat feedback, the design evolves, and British forces eventually field a weapon shaped by lessons gathered against the exact adversary they're preparing to deter. To me, that's worth more than a spot of tea and a nice afternoon at Salisbury Plain. The Times ends its reporting with a quote from a Ukrainian military source involved in these missions. He says the crews have developed a ritual whenever they launch the British drones. They say, God save the king. That's it for today, my friends. If this kind of investigation is useful, Hit the thumbs up and subscribe. I cover Ukraine, NATO, and the strange weapons that apparently begin life in a Welsh packaging factory 4 times a week right here on YouTube. That QR code down there, by the way, takes you over to my Substack where you'll find the written analysis. I also write on Medium. YouTube membership start at about £3 a month. And as always, glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes. Crimea is Ukraine.